Wet on dry. The application of watercolor paint on a dry surface. Wet on wet. The application of watercolor paint on a wet surface. Glaze. The application of a thin wash over a pre-existing dried wash. Rubbing alcohol causes paint to repel, which leaves a lighter color exposed. Salt sprinkled on a damp watercolor paint creates speckles. Each crystal of salt chases away the pigment to make a lighter area under it. Today I'll be going through 5 easy to do watercolor techniques that will give you different kind of effects and textures throughout your work. First, I begin by applying a wash over an area that I'm going to come back to and glaze over. Next, I move on to our wet on dry technique, which allows us to have a little more control over the fluidity of the paint. We're able to brush on without having to worry about it spilling over our free-forming. The wet on wet technique, I must first begin to wet the paper and saturate it with some water. Then I go in and I grab the pigment from the watercolor and just allow it to form how it does. Wet on wet allows some really organic, free-forming things to happen and is less controllable than wet on dry. To glaze, we apply a light layer of orange paint over the blue so that it can interact and begin to show the different layers. When applying alcohol to watercolor painting, one of the things you want to do is saturate the painting a little bit so that when you add the pigment and you drop the alcohol in, a magical moment happens where the alcohol pushes back the watercolor and you get this nice light effect where it changes the original nature of the watercolor painting. Lastly, when adding salt to a watercolor painting, you want to make sure that it's saturated enough and pigmented enough that when you drop the salt, what the salt will do is the salt will begin to clear out from underneath it the watercolor, but also the salt allows the watercolor to just surround the outside of it. So it gives you a nice textured, speckled effect. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.